Hello, everyone, and welcome to our course on forensic psychology. I'm very excited to be teaching this class. I've been a psychologist for over 30 years, and I'm also certified as a drug and alcohol counselor. And I cross-trained in education and in natural healing, and so I'm a naturopath, certified master herbalist, and certified natural health professional. I also trained as a coach. I'm certified as a life coach, wellness coach, and business coach. Now, some of those categories of certification really don't come into play as much in terms of the forensic world. But for 10 years, I worked in the courts as a child custody evaluator and was court appointed. And so that is where the predominant area of expertise comes that I will share with you in this course. We're fortunate in having a great textbook, and we're going to learn a lot about the various elements of forensic psychology, including looking at competency hearings pertaining to the elderly, the disabled, both in the world of children and in adults. And so I think you'll find that my approach to teaching this topic is very practical because the work that you're going to do requires you to connect and work very personally with the legal system. So you're going to interact with police officers, you're going to interact with attorneys and judges. And sometimes the marriage between psychology and counseling is not a perfect marriage. There may be differences at times in terms of how we relate to our ethical requirements. And there may be different demands on them than there are on us. And sometimes we don't speak the same language, so that can be very stressful at times. And so learning how to work collaboratively is really key. And learning how to gather information from being able to analyze data and reports from various systems, and when you're working with children, that can include the educational system, because that gives you a view into the world of how they function. And so sometimes it's a little bit of an effort, not just in terms of your time and energy, but in terms of being able to communicate to other professionals the importance of this. As a forensic psychologist, or if you're working as a counselor or therapist, we have an awful lot of power. And sometimes that power gets diminished or is not fully realized. But I think it's important to recognize the impact we have on people's lives. And sometimes this impact can be life-altering. And so when people are coming into the legal system, they're very frightened and sometimes very defensive. So you're not always going to see them at their best. In fact, most of the time we see them operating at perhaps their worst or most crisis points. And to recognize that that's not necessarily going to capture the entire image of who this individual is. That's why working collaboratively can be so important, because you need to gather information about who they were before this event or their involvement. My background as a certified drug and alcohol counselor has come into play quite a bit, because oftentimes when things escalate in families or with individuals, you can see that they may become reliant on drugs or alcohol, and that can alter their state of being, their way of thinking, their cognition, and the way they function. And so having a clear understanding of that and how it may impact or influence is critical, in being able to communicate that to other professionals. So, when I work in the courts, my role has predominantly been to do evaluations. And the evaluations could include testing or may not. And so there is, different approaches to it, and, they both are equally respected. Sometimes you gather more information through including testing that the court appreciates. And, it could involve some information about behavioral and cognitive functioning. We try to avoid too much in talking about personality disorders and those types of labels and tags, so that they don't get entered into the court system. Because these documents become legal documents, and they follow these individuals for many years. And in the case such as what I've worked in with child custody, it continues to follow them until those children are adults. And oftentimes when I've been involved, we're talking about high conflict situations. In some states, there is court-appointed mediation, and in some states that might be a free service. That's not necessarily the case in all states, and it's quite expensive to get these kinds of professional evaluations. And so you're needing to have a high level of competency, not just at conducting the assessments and the evaluations, but in being able to become an expert witness. And so we'll talk about that a little bit in our course as well. And so, really being able to communicate not only in writing, but verbally in a language that is more common knowledge, even though you still have to have evidence-based information and speak at a professional level and write at a professional level. It also has to be articulated in ways that people who are not professionals can understand, along with professionals from other backgrounds. And if that is not accomplished, then perhaps you haven't fully done your job. And so that's something that we're going to look at here in this course. Now, we're not going to be able, in the time frame that we have, to be able to write a full evaluation. And so what I've chosen to do is take you through the most significant pieces of the evaluation. And so we'll look at analyzing assessment tools, and we'll look at the importance of collaboration, and you'll be researching how do you collaborate and what types of collaboration you might be doing. Then we'll be constructing a recommendations page that is critical. It comes at the end of the report typically, whether you're talking about a competency hearing or a child custody evaluation, or some other form of judicial report. The recommendation page comes at the very end, and it's separated out from the rest of the report so that the judge can come right to it and peruse it and look at what are the findings and what's the most significant information that he needs to consider. Because your role in part is to assist the judge in making a determination. And so it's very important that you articulate these goals and be able to write recommendations in a way that are objective, and they're written in, again, language that's easily understood and can be operationally defined and functional. So these are some of the key elements of what we're going to be doing here. And for students that are at the graduate level, you'll have an extra assignment requiring you to do some research into the forensic world and a topic of your choice. So all in all, I think we have an excellent course here. And as I said, we're going to be looking at competency as well. I worked with the disabled and elderly for many years, and so I have a background in that as well. And those can be kind of tricky kinds of assessments and evaluations, because sometimes people have what they call a Swiss cheese effects, where they have areas of functioning that are within a average range or better, and then they have areas that are considered disability. And so, we need to be able to accurately assess where are the strengths and where are the weaknesses, and to be able to communicate if we're going to be removing privileges from an individual or putting them under a guardianship or some other type of restriction, why these limitations are required in terms of their safety and or their best interest. That issue of best interest is one that's argued extensively in the legal system. It's one we look at in terms of child custody. And in, I think, most cases now, when a child reaches around the age of 14, they are allowed to talk about what is their preference in terms of living arrangements and why. And so most legal professionals working in the courts try to look at what is going to change in terms of that child's life, depending on the living arrangements and where they get to live. Now, when we're talking about people in regards to competency, they don't have the same level of freedom, or rights in some ways are being restricted. So that comes back to that issue of power and the significance of power and how much power that you hold. And so I caution you to think about that, with a critical eye. And that's where our critical thinking piece comes into play, as so important for us to be able to achieve. And then in some cases, some of you may be working with the juvenile system, or individuals with a criminal background. And again, we're talking in these cases about a restriction of rights or limitations on rights, and sometimes that's for reasons of safety, not only to themselves, but to the general public. And so being able to use instruments that allow you to gather that kind of data and prove why that would be necessary is going to be a critical piece of what we're looking at here in terms of forensic psychology. So it is a newer field in many ways, and as I said, not always a perfect marriage between the legal system and the mental health system, not only because of the ethical differences, but also because there may be differences in the language that we use and being able to understand one another in a way that's productive. So again, I wanted to take the time to welcome you to our course. I'm very happy to be teaching this class, as I stated, and I'm very happy to have you join me. And I look forward to getting to know each and every one of you. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye now.